bill was ultimately passed by the New Jersey legislature. And I lobbied them, and I went and testified in front of a committee in Trenton, believe it or not, and ultimately got them to agree to put a grandfather provision in that law that said that if you're currently working in New Jersey, this isn't going to apply to you. So we were able to save those jobs of all those families. And so I point that out because a lot of times we talk about jobs or frankly any other issue, being that kind of advocate is really important as well. Now, at the federal level, what can we and what should we do? A number of things, I think. Number one, I talked before about education. As a former teacher, many of you may know, I practiced law for about 10 years. After September 11th, I decided that I was going to switch careers to do more by way of public service. I went back to school at night, became a high school teacher, and I taught at Ben Salem High School. So I'm someone who believes very strongly in education. We need to invest in education. I think what we need to do is make sure that we are providing for young people today at the high school level who want to go on to college the means to be able to do that. What does that mean? Well, one, it means that we need to lower interest rates on student loans. Two, it means we need to do something about actually lowering the cost of higher education. And one of the things that Secretary Clinton has talked about is a block grant program to the states that would be used to incentivize the states to start pushing tuitions down at state institutions. And if that happens, ultimately, through the market, it will have an impact on private institutions as well. So we need to make college more accessible by way of the cost. We also need to have, I think, a very robust, what I call, workforce development program. By that I mean this. Starting in high school, we need to have a much better system that helps guide kids as they get through high school and then if they're going directly into the workforce, into a good job. Our guidance departments are historically underfunded and understaffed. We need to invest in that. We need to make sure that those departments have the wherewithal to identify kids, what are their strengths, what are their interests, and how can we then marry that with the jobs that are out there. The secondary point of this is we need to have the infrastructure to then take that next step. The good news here is that we have that in many places, including right here in Bucks County and in Montgomery County as well. And that is our community college system. Beyond, formal classroom education that the colleges offer, they also have done a great job partnering with the private sector in training for the jobs that those private sector companies have. So I think we've got to really work on that and invest in that to expand that across the United States so that we have this very, very strong job training and job conduit program for kids that are getting out of high school, but also for workers who are finding themselves displaced. And that displacement is happening not just because of globalization, but also because of technological advances. Think about in our lives alone, how many technological leaps and bounds there have been that changed whole sectors of the economy. That's not going to stop, folks. That's here to stay. Unlike past revolutions like the Industrial Revolution, where over the course of a generation, people adjusted from an agrarian economy to an industrialized one, and then there was relative stability after that, we're not at that place. These technological changes are going to continue, which means there's a good chance that different sectors of the economy are going to continue to open up and some are going to close. And when that happens, we have to have a job training system in place that's nimble enough to help those workers who are being displaced. And it's got to be one that follows people potentially throughout their careers, because we can't guarantee that they're not going to face these challenges throughout the course of their careers. So that's another important piece that we absolutely have to look at. And then the last thing I would say is, especially for small businesses, we need to do everything we can to cut red tape so that it's easier to start up a small business and it's easier to maintain a small business over time. And we need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to make sure that there's credit available for startups and for businesses that are continuing on. One of the things I did back in 2010 was I was able to introduce a that ultimately got amended into our state fiscal code and became law, to reduce the capitalization requirement for state chartered banks. It had been something like 120%, I think. We brought it down to 100%. And that in turn freed up more money for our state banks to potentially be able to loan out credit to help the economy. I think that is very important too.
Great, thank you. The minimum wage is an issue that's been much discussed in this election. And Bucks and Montgomery counties, we have a lot of small businesses that their entire business models would be completely upended by a $15 minimum wage.
Right.
So what is your position on the issue, and where do you think we should go with that? Because we also need to measure that with the need for workers to have a livable wage.
Right. Right, and that's very well put, because there is a balance here that has to be struck. On the one hand, we have to make sure that particularly our smaller businesses are not given this burden that makes it very hard for them to be able to continue on. But on the other hand, I think we all would agree that we want to make sure that people have a livable wage. And after all, in a consumer-based economy, it's important that we have consumers who can actually consume, because ultimately that enables our economy to grow. So I do think we need to raise the minimum wage. I mean, $15 an hour may be too high, but at the very least we should start out with, say, $12 an hour and work our way to the point where it's not a shock to the system for a lot of our small businesses. But I do think we absolutely have to make sure that people have that livable wage. But listen, our policy, and this is what bothers me about the discussion of this issue time and time again, it's often the case that this issue is discussed as if this is going to be the panacea. This is going to solve our employment problems. This is going to solve the challenges that working families in this country have. It's important we do it, because we want to have a certain floor and safety net for people. But it can't be the end of the discussion. We have to do all these other things that I'm talking about in terms of making sure that we have a strong economy, and we are expanding it and employing more people, and ultimately raising wages far above the minimum wage, not because someone's being told to do that, but because economically it makes sense to do that because business is expanding. So I think that's got to be our goal ultimately.
Thank you. When the Orlando massacre happened last summer, our community in New Hope came together and held a vigil in support of the victims, because that's a value that we collectively do share here. So what is your position on marriage equality, workplace discrimination, housing discrimination, and other issues that face the LGBT community?
Yeah. Well, as I kind of touched on previously, I've always been a supporter of marriage equality from a very personal level. I was a sponsor of the marriage equality bill in Harrisburg long before it became the popular thing to do